Throughout history, science has pushed the limits of what humans can understand. But sometimes, it goes too far. These are the experiments that changed everything, and maybe shouldn't have happened at all. Case 1. Pavlov's conditioning, Russia, 1890s. In the late 19th century, inside a quiet laboratory in St. Petersburg, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov began a simple experiment. He wasn't searching for fame or fear. He was simply studying digestion, observing how dogs salivated when food was presented. But one day, he noticed something strange. Even before the food arrived, the dogs began to salivate, merely at the sound of footsteps, the sound of the assistant bringing their meal. Pavlov wondered, what if the mind could be trained like a machine? He began pairing a ringing bell with food, over and over, until eventually, the sound alone made the animals react, drooling, waiting, expecting. This was the birth of classical conditioning, a discovery that reshaped psychology forever. But behind the neat diagrams and textbook examples, there was something darker. Pavlov's lab became a theater of control. Dogs were restrained, tubes inserted to measure saliva, their reactions monitored without mercy. The goal wasn't cruelty, it was precision. And through that precision, Pavlov proved something chilling, that behavior itself could be programmed. What began with dogs soon extended to humans. Advertisers, governments, and psychologists would later build entire systems of influence based on Pavlov's discovery. A ringing bell, a repeated stimulus, a predictable response. We like to think we act by choice. But Pavlov showed that maybe we just react. Case 2. The Stanford Prison Experiment, USA, 1971. In 1971, a psychology basement at Stanford University became something far darker than a classroom. It became a prison. Dr. Philip Zimbardo wanted to study how ordinary people react to power. 24 healthy college students were divided into two roles, guards and prisoners. The experiment was meant to last 2 weeks. It barely survived 6 days. The prisoners were arrested at their homes by real police officers, blindfolded, stripped, and given numbers instead of names. The guards, wearing khaki uniforms and mirrored sunglasses, were told to keep order, but not to use violence. What followed was chaos. By the second day, the prisoners rebelled, barricading themselves in their cells. The guards struck back with fire extinguishers and psychological punishment. Each hour that passed, their cruelty grew. Sleep deprivation, humiliation, meaningless orders, all became normal. One prisoner broke down after just 36 hours, screaming to be released. Zimbardo watched everything from behind cameras, until even he forgot he was the scientist. He started acting like a real warden. The line between experiment and reality disappeared. After only 6 days, the study was shut down. The guards had become aggressors, the prisoners, victims, and Zimbardo, the architect of both. The world was shocked. The experiment revealed how quickly ordinary people could turn cruel when given power and no consequences. Later, critics would question Zimbardo's methods, even accuse him of guiding behavior. But the message remained the same. That darkness doesn't need monsters to exist. It only needs a system that allows them to be born. Case 3. The Milgram Obedience Study in 1961. In 1961, at Yale University, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to answer a disturbing question. How far would ordinary people go when ordered to harm someone else? Volunteers were told they were taking part in a study about memory and learning. They met another participant who was actually an actor. One would play the teacher, the other, the learner. The teacher's job was simple. Ask questions, and every time the learner made a mistake, press a switch to deliver an electric shock. In front of them stood a machine with switches labeled from 15 volts to 450 volts, from slight shock to danger, severe shock. Each time the teacher hesitated, the man in the white lab coat would calmly say, "The experiment requires that you continue." Behind a wall, the actor cried out in pain, begged to stop, then fell silent. Yet, most participants continued pressing the switches, all the way to the maximum voltage. What they didn't know was that no real shocks were ever given. But the emotional damage was real. Many participants trembled, sweated, even laughed nervously as they followed orders they believed were killing someone. Milgram's results stunned the world. 65% of people were willing to deliver the highest shock level simply because they were told to. The study revealed something terrifying, that obedience can override conscience. It wasn't just about the participants in that room, it was about all of us. Milgram later said, ordinary people, simply doing their jobs, can become agents in a terrible process. He proved that the greatest danger doesn't always come from evil men, but from good people, following bad orders. Case 4. The Philadelphia Experiment, 1943. In the midst of World War II, the U.S. Navy was desperate for an advantage. Rumors spread that scientists were working on a new technology, one that could make warships invisible to enemy radar. In October 1943, at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, a destroyer escort named USS Eldridge supposedly became the center of a secret test. According to later accounts, strange coils were installed across the ship's deck, and powerful electromagnetic fields were activated. Witnesses claimed the ship began to shimmer, then vanished, not just from radar, but from sight itself. Moments later, it reappeared, hundreds of miles away, near Norfolk, Virginia, before returning to Philadelphia. But the story didn't end there. When the ship rematerialized, the accounts grew even darker. Some sailors were said to be missing. Others were reportedly fused into the metal hull, their bodies half submerged in steel, frozen in agony. A few, it was claimed, went insane, unable to remember what had happened. The Navy has always denied the experiment ever took place, calling it a myth born from misunderstanding and fiction. Yet, the story refuses to die. Supporters insist the government was experimenting with electromagnetic cloaking and teleportation based on early versions of Einstein's unified field theory. Others believe it was nothing more than a secret test for radar jamming, exaggerated by fear and rumor. No official documents, no credible witnesses, and no proof. Still, the tale of the Philadelphia experiment endures, because deep down, people wonder if, just once, humanity might have tampered with forces it wasn't ready to control. And if the ship truly disappeared that day, perhaps it didn't come back exactly the same. Case 5. The MK-Ultra Program, 1953 and 1973. In the early years of the Cold War, fear was everywhere. Fear of spies, of brainwashing, of losing control. And in that fear, the CIA launched one of the most disturbing programs in history, Project MK-Ultra. Its goal was simple, yet horrifying: to discover how to control the human mind. Under the direction of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA funded over 150 secret experiments. Hospitals, universities, even prisons were used, often without the subject's consent. Ordinary citizens, soldiers, and psychiatric patients were dosed with powerful hallucinogens, hypnotized, deprived of sleep, or subjected to sensory isolation. They were told it was research for therapy. It wasn't. The agency believed that by breaking a person's mind, they could rebuild it, creating perfect spies, assassins, or victims who wouldn't remember what had been done to them. In one infamous case, a government scientist named Frank Olson was secretly given LSD during a meeting. Days later, he fell from a hotel window in New York. The CIA called it suicide. His family called it murder. When the program was exposed in the 1970s, most of its files had already been destroyed. What survived painted a picture of a government willing to experiment on its own people, all in the name of national security. Congress held hearings. The CIA apologized. But the truth of what really happened in those hidden rooms remains sealed. Case 6. The Russian Sleep Experiment. Legend, 1940s. In the dark aftermath of World War II, rumors began to surface from behind the Iron Curtain. Stories of a Soviet experiment so horrifying, it sounded impossible. They called it the Russian Sleep Experiment. According to the legend, 5 political prisoners were locked inside an airtight chamber, as scientists pumped in a mysterious gas designed to eliminate the need for sleep. The experiment was meant to last 30 days. It didn't. At first, the subjects behaved normally, talking, reading, exercising. But by the 5th day, paranoia began to set in. They whispered to themselves, pacing the room, eyes hollow from exhaustion. By the 9th day, the screaming began. Then, silence. When researchers finally opened the chamber, what they found defied comprehension. The subjects were still alive, but barely. Their bodies were mutilated, their minds fractured. They begged the scientists not to let them sleep again, insisting that consciousness itself had become their only reality. None of the official Soviet archives mentioned such an experiment. No documents, no witnesses. Many dismissed the tale as internet fiction, a product of Cold War paranoia and the fascination with forbidden science. But the story endures for a reason. It taps into a fear older than any weapon, the terror of what happens when human curiosity forgets its limits. Whether it was real or not no longer matters. The Russian sleep experiment lives on in whispers, online forums, and shadowy retellings, a chilling reminder that the line between science and nightmare has always been thinner than we think. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this descent into the darker side of science, leave a like and subscribe for more. What should be the next experiment or mystery we unravel?